The cowboy realized the woman stepping off the train was about to ruin every quiet rule he'd built his life around. Snow lashed sideways across the red hollow platform as Wade Barrett grabbed the woman's suitcase before it tipped into the mud. She pulled it back from him instead. Steam hissed from the train wheels. Somewhere behind them, a horse kicked hard against wood. Then she looked at his wagon and asked, "Do you always welcome strangers like prisoners?" Wade stopped cold, because nothing in her letters had prepared him for this woman. If this story pulls you in, stay with us till the end. In October of 1885, the wind came early to Wyoming territory. It rolled down from the mountains in long, cold breaths, carrying dust across the empty roads outside Red Hollow and rattling the loose boards of every storefront along Main Street. Folks said winter would come hard that year. Wade Barrett believed them. Men who lived long enough in the mountains learned to trust the way the air smelled before snow. That was part of the reason he wrote the letter. The other reason sat waiting for him every night inside Black Ridge Ranch. Silence, thick as wool, heavy enough to press against a man's chest after sundown. Wade Barrett was 39 years old and had spent most of the last 6 winters speaking more to horses than people. He rose before daylight, worked until dark, ate alone, and slept in a cabin that still carried the shape of someone missing from it. So he wrote to a matrimonial agency in St. Louis. He asked for a woman who could cook, keep house, endure Wyoming winters without complaint. He did not ask for beauty. He did not ask for love. He asked for practicality the same way a man might ask for good fencing wire or a sturdy workhorse. 3 months later, Sheriff Boone Carter handed Wade a telegram outside the feed store. Arrives Thursday afternoon passenger, Clara Bennett. Boone folded his arms and looked Wade over slowly. "You nervous?" "No, that means yes." Wade ignored him. By Thursday, cold rain had turned the road to mud. The Northern Pacific train screamed into Red Hollow beneath a sky the color of wet iron. Steam rolled across the depot platform while passengers stepped down, carrying carpetbags and blankets. Then Wade saw her. She was taller than he expected. Not delicate, not timid. A dark blue traveling coat wrapped close around her shoulders, trimmed neat at the cuffs despite the long journey west. One gloved hand gripped the handle of a heavy suitcase. The other carried a leather case that looked too narrow for clothes. Books, Wade realized later. Of course it was books. Clara Bennett stepped off the train and stopped directly in front of him. Her eyes moved over him once. Hat, coat, mud on his boots, the stubble he had missed shaving that morning. "You're Wade Barrett," she said. Her voice carried Boston in it. Educated, clean, certain. Yes. She glanced toward the wagon waiting near the hitching post. Old wood, feed sacks in the back, one lantern swinging from the side. Then she looked back at him. "Are you planning to let me live in that?" she asked calmly. "Or lock me inside it?" Boone Carter coughed hard to hide a laugh. Wade stared at her a moment longer than necessary. Already this was not what he ordered. He reached for her suitcase. Roads bad after dark. That wasn't an answer. "It's a wagon," Wade said, "not a prison." Clara studied him another second before handing over the case. "I suppose I'll decide that myself." The ride north out of Red Hollow took nearly 2 hours. Rain tapped against the wagon canvas while the horses pulled through mud and shallow ruts carved into the road. Pine trees thickened along the hillsides. Smoke rose from distant cabins before disappearing into fog. Clara asked questions the entire way. How many cattle did he own? How far was the nearest doctor? Did snow block the trails in winter? Why was every fence in Wyoming crooked? Wade answered most of them with one sentence, sometimes one word. Finally, Clara leaned back against the seat and folded her gloves into her lap. "You know," she said, "back east, people usually speak in complete conversations. Sounds tiring." That almost made her smile. Almost. Near dusk, Clara noticed his hands gripping the reins. No wedding band, no ring box, no mention of a church. She looked toward him carefully this time. When exactly were you planning for this marriage to happen? Wade kept his eyes on the road ahead. When you decide you want to stay. Clara blinked once. Excuse me? I'm not dragging a woman into vows before she's certain. Rain rattled softly overhead. For the first time since leaving St. Louis, Clara went quiet. Most men she had met treated marriage like ownership, especially men desperate enough to order wives through the mail. But Wade Barrett spoke about it like a door left unlocked. You'd really let me leave? She asked. If you hate it here, he said, I'll drive you back to town myself. The wagon rolled forward through growing darkness. Clara looked at him differently, after that, not warmly, not yet. But something in her expression shifted. Black Ridge Ranch appeared just after nightfall, a long stretch of fenced land beneath the mountains. Barn lights glowing through mist, smoke curling from the chimney of a broad log cabin sitting against the hills like it had grown there. Wade carried her suitcase inside without ceremony. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar smoke and coffee grounds. Everything stood neat, functional, plain. No photographs, no decorations, no softness. Wade lit another lamp and nodded toward the hallway. Rooms at the end. Clara picked up her smaller bag and disappeared down the hall while Wade remained near the stove pulling off his gloves. A moment later, silence broke. Not loud, just still enough to make Wade look up. Clara stood frozen in the doorway of the bedroom. The room looked untouched by time. A folded quilt lay across the bed beneath a thin layer of dustless care. A silver-backed hairbrush rested beside a wash basin. Dried lavender still hung near the window, though its color had long faded. Even the curtains looked chosen by another woman's hands. Clara turned slowly toward him. Whose room is this? The fire cracked behind him. Wade did not answer right away. Finally he said, quiet as falling snow, It belonged to someone I once planned to marry. The wind pushed hard against the cabin walls, and Clara realized she had not arrived at a ranch waiting for a wife. She had arrived inside a life that had stopped moving years ago. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old cedar. Not stale, preserved. That was worse somehow. A cream-colored shawl still hung over the chair near the window. A Bible rested on the nightstand beside a burned-down candle. Even the water pitcher had been polished recently, though no one had slept in the room for years. Clara stood very still. Behind her, Wade shifted his weight once on the floorboards. If you'd rather another room, he said quietly, I can clear the storage room by morning. Clara looked back at him. You clean this room? Sometimes. The answer settled heavily between them. Not because of what he said, because of what he didn't. Outside, the wind pushed snow-melt rain against the cabin windows. Somewhere in the barn, a horse stamped hard against wood. Clara set her suitcase down beside the bed. I'll stay here tonight. Wade nodded once. Supper's on the stove if you're hungry. Then he disappeared down the hallway before she could answer. That first night at Black Ridge Ranch, Clara barely slept. The cabin carried sounds differently than city homes. Timber creaked in the cold. Pipes knocked softly behind walls. Wind moved through distant pine trees with a low, restless hum. Around midnight, she heard Wade outside, not talking, just working. She moved the curtain slightly and saw him through the dark, carrying split logs toward the woodshed beneath a lantern glow. Snow threatened in the clouds above the mountains. The man worked like someone afraid to stop moving. The next morning began before sunrise. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and bacon grease drifting through the cabin. She dressed quickly, buttoning her dark traveling skirt while cold air slipped beneath the doorframe. In the kitchen, Wade stood at the stove wearing the same gray work shirt from the day before. Steam curled from a tin coffee pot beside him. He placed a plate on the table. Eggs, biscuits, salt pork. You cook? Clara asked. When necessary, she sat carefully. You didn't mention that in your letter. You didn't mention the books. For the first time, the corner of her mouth moved slightly. Breakfast passed mostly in silence. Not awkward exactly, just unfamiliar. Afterward, Wade handed her a small ring of keys. Pantry, root cellar, supply shed. You trust me quickly. I don't have time not to. By afternoon, Clara began understanding the ranch. Black Ridge was larger than she expected. Long fencing stretched toward snow-covered hills. The barn roof needed repairs before deep winter. Feed barrels sat half-empty. One broken wagon wheel leaned against the stable wall, where it had likely remained for months. Inside the cabin, things were worse. The books on Wade's shelf had not been touched in years. Receipts sat stacked beneath a coffee tin. Bills from livestock suppliers remained unopened beside the fireplace. The house did not feel abandoned, it felt paused. That evening, Clara rolled up her sleeves and started with the kitchen. She scrubbed soot from the stovepipe, reorganized shelves, tossed spoiled flour crawling with weevils from the pantry. By sunset, she had opened the curtains wide enough for golden light to finally reach the corners of the room. Wade returned after dark, carrying saddle blankets over one shoulder. He stopped inside the doorway. The cabin looked different, not prettier, alive. A lamp burned at the center of the table. Steam rose from beef stew near two waiting bowls. Clara stood near the stove with her sleeves rolled to her elbows, a loose strand of brown hair slipping near her cheek. Wade stared a second too long before setting the blankets down. You moved things. Yes, Clara said calmly. Your kitchen was organized by a man who hates himself. He blinked once. Then, unexpectedly, Boone Carter burst out laughing from the porch doorway behind him. There she is, Boone said, stepping inside and stomping snow from his boots. The woman brave enough to insult Wade Barrett before supper. Clara offered her hand politely. You're the sheriff, and smart besides. Boone shook her hand warmly. Town's already placing bets on how long you last here. How generous of them. Boone sat at the table while Wade removed his coat near the fire. Edith Monroe says you'll run back east before first snowfall, Boone added. Who's Edith Monroe? Owns the dress shop in Red Hollow, Wade muttered. Owns most everybody else's gossip, too. Clara ladled stew into bowls. Then, I suppose I should disappoint her. Boone watched her quietly after that. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Because something in the cabin had shifted already. The place sounded different with another voice in it. Later that night, Boone stepped outside with Wade while Clara washed dishes inside. Snow drifted softly beneath the lantern light. Boone lowered his voice. She's not what you expected. No. You sending her back? Wade looked through the window. Clara stood near the sink, drying dishes with careful, steady movements. Warm light touched the side of her face. For the first time in years, someone occupied the kitchen without feeling temporary. No, Wade said after a long pause, then more quietly. Not if she decides to stay. Boone studied his old friend carefully. You know, he said, Martha used to stand at that sink exactly the same way. Wade's jaw tightened instantly. Boone regretted the words the moment they left his mouth. Inside the cabin, Clara slowed her movements slightly, not because she meant to listen, but because she heard the silence afterward. And for the first time, she understood that the dead woman in the bedroom still lived inside every corner of that ranch. That night, long after Wade banked the fire and the cabin went dark, Clara heard music drifting faintly through the wind. A harmonica. Low, slow, almost broken sounding. She pulled on her coat and stepped quietly onto the porch. Near the barn, beneath the pale wash of moonlight on snow, Wade sat alone on an overturned crate. The harmonica rested in his hands. His head bowed low, and when he wiped his face roughly against his sleeve before lifting the instrument again, Clara realized with sudden, painful clarity that Wade Barrett was not a cold man at all. He was a grieving one. She stepped back into the cabin before he noticed her watching. By morning, snow had begun falling across Black Ridge. Not heavy yet, just thin, white streaks drifting sideways through the wind. Wade was already outside before sunrise, breaking ice from the horse trough with the back of an axe. Clara watched him through the kitchen window while coffee boiled on the stove. He moved steadily, quietly, like a man used to carrying weather alone. When he came inside, his coat shoulders were dusted white. "There's more coming," he said, setting his gloves near the fire. Clara handed him a cup of coffee without thinking. Wade paused before taking it. Their fingers brushed briefly against the tin cup. Neither mentioned it. The storm settled over Wyoming by the end of the week. Roads disappeared first, then fences, then entire hillsides beneath deep drifts of snow that swallowed sound and distance alike. Black Ridge became an island surrounded by white emptiness. Most mornings, Clara woke to the scrape of Wade's boots before dawn and the smell of wood smoke drifting through the cabin. The routines formed slowly. She repaired torn shirts beside the lamp at night, while Wade sharpened tools at the table across from her. He never asked why she mended the cuffs twice, where fabric wore thin near his wrists. She never asked why he quietly left extra firewood stacked outside her bedroom door each evening. Something settled between people without needing names. One afternoon, Clara sat at the kitchen table studying a stack of invoices while sleet rattled the windows. Samuel Pike's receipts did not add up, not even close. She checked the cattle numbers twice, then a third time. When Wade came in carrying a sack of feed over one shoulder, she slid the papers toward him. "You're being cheated." Wade frowned slightly. "By who?" "Samuel Pike. That's impossible." "It's arithmetic," Clara replied calmly. "Arithmetic doesn't care about impossible." She showed him the figures: missing cattle weights, reduced sale prices, feed costs inflated nearly double over 2 winters. Wade stood silent for a long while. Then he sat down slowly across from her. No one had ever gone through his ranch accounts before. No one had cared enough to. "He's been bleeding you dry," Clara said softly. The fire cracked low beside them. Wade rubbed one rough hand across his jaw. "Why would Pike do that? Because he thinks you won't notice." Outside, wind slammed hard against the barn doors. For the first time since Clara arrived, Wade looked tired instead of simply quiet. A few days later, Clara rode with him into Red Hollow, beneath a sky thick with snow clouds. The town looked smaller in winter. Smoke curled from chimneys. Horses stood steaming outside the general store. People stared when Clara stepped down from the wagon beside Wade, not openly rude, just curious in the sharp way frontier towns always were. Edith Monroe watched from the doorway of her dress shop wrapped in dark wool and judgment. "That city woman still alive?" she called toward Boone Carter, standing near the barber shop. Boone grinned. "Disappointing plenty of folks, Edith." Clara pretended not to hear. Inside the mercantile, Wade ordered flour, lamp oil, and coffee beans, while Clara checked prices written in chalk along the wall. She noticed Pike standing near the stove, speaking quietly with 2 cattle buyers. The moment he saw her looking, his smile faded. Samuel Pike was broad through the shoulders with silver at his temples and expensive boots, polished cleaner than most men's Sunday shoes. He tipped his hat toward Wade. "Heard you finally brought yourself a wife." "Not yet," Wade answered shortly. Pike's eyes shifted toward Clara. "Careful, Barrett. Women from back east tend to melt before February." Clara met his gaze evenly. "Good thing I didn't come here for comfort." Boone nearly choked laughing behind them. Pike's smile thinned. That night the storm worsened. Snow buried the lower fencing near the north ridge where Wade kept part of the cattle herd. Just after midnight, someone pounded hard against the cabin door. Boone stood outside, covered in snow. "Half your herd busted through the north fence," he shouted over the wind. "They're heading toward the ravine." Wade grabbed his coat immediately. Clara followed him to the door. "You can't track cattle in this weather. Can't afford not to." The lantern light shook violently between them. Snow whipped through the doorway in sharp freezing gusts. "You'll freeze out there," Clara said. Wade buckled his gun belt and pulled on heavy gloves. Been close before. Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. He turned toward the storm without another word. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Wind screamed through the mountains hard enough to shake the cabin walls. By dawn, Wade still had not returned. Boone arrived pale-faced and exhausted, snow packed thick in his beard. We lost his trail near Miller's Pass. Clara was already reaching for her coat. Boone grabbed her arm lightly. Don't. I know those hills from the map. You don't know Winter Mountains. Her eyes lifted toward the storm outside. No, she said quietly. But I know what happens when someone waits too long. Boone understood then. The same fear Wade carried inside him now lived somewhere inside her too. Clara saddled Wade's horse herself. The wind nearly tore the reins from her hands as she rode north into the white wilderness while Boone shouted after her through the storm. Snow swallowed everything beyond 20 feet. Trees appeared like ghosts through blowing ice. The horse struggled through drifts nearly to its chest. Clara's gloves soaked through long before she reached the ridgeline. Then she saw him. Wade lay half against a rock outcrop near the ravine, one leg trapped beneath his horse's saddle strap after the animal had gone down. Blood darkened the snow near his temple. His eyes barely opened when Clara reached him. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered weakly. She dropped to her knees beside him, breath shaking hard in the freezing wind. "That makes two of us." Snow gathered across Wade's coat and in the dark stubble along his jaw. One side of his face was streaked with blood where he must have struck the rocks during the fall. His horse lay nearby, breathing hard, legs trembling beneath the drifted snow. Clara forced herself to stay calm. Panic killed people faster than winter did. "Can you stand?" she asked. Wade tried once and nearly collapsed. So she hooked his arm over her shoulders and dragged him toward a line of pine trees where the wind broke slightly against the slope. Her gloves were soaked through. Her cheeks burned from the cold. By the time Boone Carter found them near dusk with a lantern and 2 extra horses, Clara could barely feel her hands. But Wade was alive. That was enough. The ride back to Black Ridge happened through a blur of blowing white and shaking lantern light. Boone helped Wade into the cabin, while Clara stumbled toward the stove and threw more wood into the firebox with stiff, frozen fingers. For 2 days, the storm trapped them there. Wade drifted in and out of sleep on the sofa near the fireplace, while Clara cleaned the cut near his temple with boiled water and whiskey from the medicine cabinet. Sometimes he spoke without waking fully. Mostly numbers, cattle counts, fence lines. Once late at night he whispered another woman's name, Martha. Clara looked away after that. On the 3rd morning the fever finally eased. Weak winter sunlight spilled through the curtains while Wade opened his eyes fully for the first time. Clara sat asleep in the chair beside him with a book folded face down in her lap and one stockinged foot tucked beneath her skirt near the fire. Wade watched her quietly. There were dark circles beneath her eyes. He noticed the burn mark on her wrist from the stove kettle, the loose strand of hair falling near her cheek, the fact that she had worn herself thin caring for a man she barely knew. His voice came rough from sleep. "You should have stayed in town." Clara startled awake instantly. "And let you freeze to death. You could died out there. So could you." Silence settled softly between them, the kind that no longer felt sharp. Wade glanced toward the coffee pot warming near the stove. "You made coffee wrong?" Clara stared at him a second before realizing he was serious. A tired laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Wade looked almost surprised to hear it. Outside, the storm finally passed. But Red Hollow had not forgotten Clara Bennett. 3 days later, Edith Monroe stood near the church steps, speaking loudly enough for half the town to hear. Funny how fast a woman settles herself into a ranch once there's land attached to it. Several women pretended not to listen while listening very carefully. Clara tightened Lucy May's scarf beneath the little girl's chin and kept walking. Lucy looked up nervously. Miss Edith says mean things about everybody. That must be exhausting for her. The child smiled at that. Lucy May had started visiting Black Ridge after Clara found her sitting outside the church during the storm with shoes too thin for winter. Now, the little girl spent afternoons beside the kitchen fire, learning letters from old newspapers and copying words onto scraps of feed paper with a pencil barely longer than her hand. Wade never commented on it, but he built her a small stool for the kitchen table without being asked. That evening, Clara found him outside repairing harness straps beneath the barn lantern. "You didn't have to make that stool," she said quietly. Wade kept working. "Kid was too short. She likes you. She likes the horses." Clara smiled faintly and leaned against the stall door. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Wade finally said, "Boone told me you stayed beside me the whole time. You had a fever. You still stayed." The lantern flame flickered softly between them. Clara looked down at his hands, pulling leather through the buckle. Large hands, scarred, careful despite their roughness. "You would have done the same," she said. Wade did not answer immediately. "No," he admitted at last. "I don't think I would have let anyone get that close." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. For the first time, Clara understood something difficult. Wade Barrett was not withholding affection out of cruelty. He genuinely did not know how to hold on to people without fearing he would lose them. A week later, she discovered the truth about the ranch. The ledger books sat open across the kitchen table, while Wade was outside checking the north fencing. Clara compared overdue bank notices with supply receipts and slowly felt her stomach tighten. Mortgage extensions, late cattle payments, feed debt, Samuel Pike's contracts. Black Ridge was nearly broke. When Wade came back inside, stomping snow from his boots, Clara turned the papers toward him slowly. "You were never looking for a wife," she said quietly. Wade stopped moving. "You were looking for help." The fire cracked sharply between them. "I was looking for both," he answered. "You should told me. I intended to. When I knew you weren't leaving." The hurt on Clara's face appeared so briefly another man might have missed it. Wade did not. She rose from the table slowly. "You asked a stranger to build a future inside a ranch already falling apart. I thought I could fix it before winter. You thought you could carry it alone. That's what I've always done." Clara turned toward the window, jaw tight. Outside, snow slid softly from the barn roof beneath pale afternoon light. "You keep deciding things for everyone around you," she said quietly. "Then you call it protection." Wade's shoulders stiffened. "I was trying to spare you." "No," Clara said, finally looking back at him. "You were deciding. I couldn't handle the truth." Silence filled the cabin, heavy this time. Wade removed his gloves slowly and set them beside the door. "I don't know how to make people stay," he admitted. The words landed harder than shouting would have. Clara looked at him a long moment after that. Then she walked quietly down the hallway and closed her bedroom door. 3 days later, she packed her suitcase. The morning train east left Red Hollow just after noon. Wade did not ask her to stay. That hurt worse than if he had. Snow crunched beneath Clara's boots as she stood near the depot platform waiting beside her luggage. Steam drifted from the approaching locomotive far down the tracks. Then Lucy May came running through the snow. "Miss Clara." The little girl stopped breathless in front of her and held out a bundle wrapped in brown cloth. "I think he wanted to finish it before you left." Clara slowly unfolded the fabric, a wool scarf, uneven stitches, crooked edges, one side tighter than the other, like the hands making it had learned only recently. Wade Barrett's hands, big rough cowboy hands full of old scars and rope burns. Clara stared down at the half-finished scarf while cold wind moved across the platform. Then she realized something all at once. The man had taught himself to knit because he noticed she shivered at night. The train whistle echoed somewhere beyond the snowy hills. Lucy May stood breathing hard beside the platform, cheeks red from the cold. Clara stared at the crooked wool stitches in her hands. A few loops had come loose near the edge. One side was longer than the other. It looked nothing like the scarves sold in Boston shop windows. It looked like effort. Real effort. The kind made quietly at night when nobody was watching. Did he say anything? Clara asked softly. Lucy shook her head. Mr. Wade just asked me to bring it. Of course he did. Clara looked toward the tracks where smoke from the approaching train curled into the pale winter sky. People nearby shifted luggage and pulled coats tighter around themselves. One step onto that train, and Black Ridge would become another strange chapter she never spoke about again. But she could still picture Wade sitting alone beneath lantern, light, rough hands struggling carefully through yarn because he noticed something as small as her shivering. No man had ever paid attention that quietly before. The train thundered closer. Clara folded the scarf slowly, then picked up her suitcase, but not toward the platform, toward the road home. Snowmelt dripped steadily from the roof of Black Ridge Ranch by the time she returned 2 days later. Winter had begun loosening its grip across the valley. Thin streams cut through the ice near the fence lines. Mud replaced hard snow along the wagon ruts leading to the barn. Clara stepped onto the porch, carrying her suitcase in one hand and the unfinished scarf tucked beneath her arm. For a moment, she simply stood there listening. The ranch sounded different in early spring. Water dripping from gutters, horses shifting in the stable, wind softer now. Then the front door opened. Wade stopped dead the second he saw her. He looked thinner than before she left. More tired, too. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw, and the bandage near his temple had only recently come off. Neither spoke immediately. Clara finally set the suitcase down beside the porch rail. I'm still not convinced you're easy to live with, she said. Wade blinked once. Then very quietly, she added, but I'd like to try again. Something moved across his face then. Small, barely visible, relief, real enough to hurt. He stepped aside from the doorway without another word, and somehow that felt more intimate than if he had touched her. Spring came slowly to Wyoming territory. The snow withdrew inch by inch from the hillsides surrounding Black Ridge. Calves were born in muddy fields beneath pale blue skies. Fence posts ruined by winter had to be replaced one at a time. Life returned through labor. Clara settled into the ranch differently now. Not like a visitor, like someone planting roots. She turned the unused corner near the front window into a small reading space, with shelves Wade built from leftover pine boards. Lucy May began arriving every Wednesday and Sunday, carrying school copybooks tied together with twine. Soon, 2 more children joined her. Then 4. By April, the cabin near the mountains held the sound of children reading aloud, while stew simmered on the stove and sunlight spilled warm across the floorboards. Wade often paused outside before coming in, just listening. Sometimes Clara caught him doing it through the window. He always pretended otherwise. One evening after supper, Clara found him behind the barn, repairing harness leather beside the fading light. The unfinished scarf rested folded carefully in his coat pocket. You never finished it, she said. Wade kept his eyes on the buckle in his hands. Ran out of yarn. You could ask Boone to buy more. I didn't know if you were coming back. The honesty of it settled softly between them. Clara stepped closer. Not enough to touch. Enough to stand beside him. You should asked me to stay, she said quietly. Wade nodded once after a long silence. I know. The mountains glowed gold behind the ranch as the sun lowered across the valley. For a moment, neither moved. Then Wade reached into his pocket awkwardly and handed her the scarf. I think the ends are uneven, he muttered. Clara looked down at the crooked stitches and smiled to herself. I think, she said gently, they're perfect. The wedding happened in May beside the small church outside Red Hollow. No grand decorations, no expensive flowers. just clean mountain air, muddy boots, and pine trees swaying softly in the wind beyond the hills. Boone Carter stood beside Wade wearing a suit that fit him badly. Lucy May scattered wildflowers down the church aisle from a basket nearly bigger than she was. Edith Monroe attended too, though disappointment sat plainly on her face the entire afternoon. Samuel Pike did not come. Inside the little wooden church, sunlight filtered through plain glass windows onto worn floorboards polished by decades of boots. Clara stood facing Wade with her hands folded calmly before her. For once, Wade looked nervous. The preacher smiled faintly before asking the question. "Mr. Barrett, do you take this woman to be your wife?" Wade looked at Clara a long moment, long enough that even Boone shifted slightly beside him. Then Wade spoke in the same quiet voice Clara first heard at the train station months ago. "I thought I ordered someone to help keep my ranch alive," he said. "Turns out she's the one who kept me alive." Clara's eyes filled before she could stop them. Outside, the spring wind moved gently through the valley, and somewhere beyond the church windows, snow still rested high in the mountains where winter always lingered longest. Years later, travelers crossing Wyoming territory often stopped at Black Ridge Ranch for water, coffee, or shelter before heading west. Children learned their letters there beside the firelight. Music sometimes drifted from the cabin on Sunday evenings after supper. And on the bookshelf, Wade Barrett built with his own hands, beside worn novels and old school primers, rested a single folded letter from Boston. The letter that brought Clara Bennett west. The letter that changed everything after two lonely people stopped trying to survive life alone. Maybe that's why stories like this stay with us long after they end. Because deep down, most people know what it feels like to carry silence for too many years, to sit at a table that feels too quiet, to wake up every morning and keep moving simply because stopping would hurt more. And maybe, if we're honest, a part of us hopes someone might one day notice the small things too. The way Clara noticed Wade leaving extra firewood outside her door. The way Wade noticed she shivered at night and taught himself something as simple as knitting just to keep her warm. Not grand gestures, not perfect words, just love showing up quietly when nobody's looking. If you had been standing on that snowy train platform, would you have boarded the train or turned back toward the ranch? Tell me in the comments. I'd really love to hear your answer. Out in places like Wyoming territory, people survived because they learned something important. A home is not built from wood, nails, or land alone. Sometimes it's built slowly between two wounded people who finally stop expecting to face the cold by themselves. And somewhere beyond this story, there are still more quiet frontiers waiting for us. More lonely hearts, old ranches, winter roads, and unexpected chances at love and healing. So if tonight's story found a place in your heart, I hope you'll stay a little longer and ride into the next one with us.